Part 1. The Funeral of Earth. The evacuation of Earth was not a single event, but a slow, agonizing century of goodbyes. World War IV had not been a war of nuclear fire, but a war of attrition. Climate systems, already fragile from centuries of abuse, were finally weaponized. The polar ice caps were seeded to accelerate melting, drowning every coastal city. The jet streams were chemically altered, locking Siberia into a perpetual ice age and turning the Amazon into a desert. By 2150, the planet was a dying, exhausted patient, its atmosphere thick with dust, and its oceans stagnant and acidified. The arcs were not sleek starships from old movies. They were world ships, city-sized cylinders, each a self-contained biosphere, designed for a journey that would span centuries. There were 12 in total, launched from what remained of the old space elevators, but only one, the Last Hope, carried the full genetic and cultural archive of humanity. The others were diversions, or perhaps just lifeboats for those who could afford them. The Hope was the last to leave, carrying not the rich, but the necessary. Engineers, biologists, teachers, artists, and 1 million fertilized embryos in cryogenic storage. Their destination was Alpha 22b, discovered 2 generations prior by the Deep Space Survey Telescope named Sentinel. It was a miracle. Orbiting a quiet K-type orange dwarf star 640 light-years away, in the constellation of Lyra. It sat in the precise Goldilocks zone, where liquid water could exist. Spectral analysis suggested a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. Its radius was 2.4 times that of Earth. A super-Earth. They knew the gravity would be heavier, but the alternative was extinction. Alpha 22b was not a choice. It was the only name on the ballot. Captain Elara Vance stood on the observation deck. As Earth, a brown, swollen, tear-streaked marble. She was the 3rd generation of her family to command this vessel, though her grandparents had only designed the bridge. She felt the weight of the 10,000 souls in cryosleep behind her, and the 2,000 awake crew who would live and die on this ship, so that their descendants might see a new shore. "Course locked, Captain," said her navigation officer, a young man named Kenji. "Gravitational slingshot around Jupiter is complete. We're at 1% light speed and climbing." "Activate the Bussard scoops," Elara ordered. "Let's start drinking from the river as we go." The Last Hope was a generation ship powered by a fusion-driven Bussard ramjet. A massive magnetic field, invisible and powerful, extended for thousands of kilometers ahead of the ship, acting like a funnel. It scooped up the sparse hydrogen atoms floating in the interstellar medium, about 1 atom per cubic centimeter, and channeled them into the ship's fusion reactors. Theoretically, they could accelerate indefinitely, never running out of fuel. Elara watched the screen as Earth became just another bright star. She didn't say goodbye. She simply turned her back and walked onto the bridge, ready for the centuries-long vigil. Part 2. The Gravity Shadow. The first 50 years were the hardest. The ship became its own world. Forests grew in the cylindrical habitat rings, watered by artificial rain. Children were born, lived, loved, and died, never knowing a planetary surface. They were taught that their home was the ship, and their destiny was the star. They passed close to a neutron star, a city-sized stellar corpse, spinning 700 times a second. Its lighthouse beam of radiation, a pulsar wind, buffeted the Hope's magnetic shields, lighting up the aurora on the hull in terrifyingly beautiful sheets of blue and violet. The radiation dose for that month equaled a century of Earth background radiation, but the shielding held. It was in year 87, when Elara Vance IV, the great-great-granddaughter of the first, was captain, that they encountered the first true obstacle: the abyss. Their course to Alpha 22b took them perilously close to the gravitational influence of a supermassive black hole, designated Sagittarius A star's distant cousin, a sleeping giant at the center of a small dead galaxy they were forced to cut across. This was no stellar mass black hole, but a monster with the mass of 4 million suns. They would pass within 500 billion kilometers of it, far, far away in human terms, but terrifyingly close in gravitational terms. The first sign of trouble was not visual. The black hole was invisible against the ink-black void, its event horizon a sphere of darkness the size of a small solar system. But its presence was felt. The ship's internal clocks began to run at ever so slightly different rates from bow to stern. It was a phenomenon predicted by Einstein, gravitational time dilation. "Captain," the science officer reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. "The chronometers are off. The stern clock is running 3 microseconds slower than the bow clock. The gravity gradient is stretching us." The black hole was pulling harder on the front of the ship than the back. It was a spaghettification force, though at their distance, it was still weak. But it was a stark reminder of the danger. Then the accretion disk came into view. It was a swirl of gas and dust, heated to millions of degrees by friction and magnetic fields, orbiting the black hole at near light speed. It was a cosmic blender of pure energy, glowing with the light of 1,000 suns. They had to go around it. The direct path was blocked by this maelstrom of radiation. Their detour would add 15 years to the journey and take them through a region where gravity waves, ripples in the fabric of space-time itself, were at their peak. For 3 months, the last hope rode the waves. It was like sailing through a storm where the sea itself was reality. The ship was compressed and expanded by fractions of a millimeter, but the stress on the massive hull was immense. The creaking and groaning of metal became the ship's constant, terrifying heartbeat. Crew members reported nausea and disorientation, their inner ears confused by the subtle warping of space-time. But they emerged. They had used the black hole's immense gravity to perform a slingshot maneuver, gaining a tremendous boost in speed. They were now traveling at 12% the speed of light. The price was 15 years of their lives, and the psychological scar of having stared into the abyss. Part 3. The Frozen Years. With the black hole behind them, the journey settled into a long, cold cruise. The Bussard scoops worked tirelessly. The fusion reactors hummed, and generation followed generation. The mission became a myth, a religion, a purpose. The phrase "for the landing" was the standard answer to any question about why a task must be done. But the universe was not done testing them. In year 142, they entered the Great Void. It was a vast bubble in the galaxy, a region cleared of gas and dust by ancient supernova explosions millions of years ago. The Bussard scoops, which relied on interstellar hydrogen, suddenly found nothing to collect. The fusion reactors had fuel reserves for a decade. But this void was 30 light-years across. Captain Mira Hassan, a woman of quiet desperation, made the hardest decision in the ship's history. They had to power down. Non-essential systems were shut down. The habitat rings stopped spinning, their pseudo-gravity replaced by the microgravity of coasting. The forests went dark. The rivers froze. The ship fell into a deep, silent sleep. The crew retreated to the inner core, huddling around the minimal power needed to keep the cryochamber stable and the life support for a skeleton crew of 50. The rest entered a chemically induced hibernation. For 80 years, the last hope drifted like a ghost ship. It was a metal tomb sailing through an absolute vacuum, its temperature dropping to just 3 degrees above absolute zero. Only the faint glow of the Cherenkov radiation from the still active, though minimal, reactor core gave any sign of life. The voyage of silence, as it would later be called, broke many. When they emerged on the other side, and the scoops began to sing with the familiar whisper of hydrogen once more, Only 38 of the skeleton crew survived. They had faced the ultimate loneliness, and they had won. They reinflated the habitat rings. They thawed the ice. They planted new seeds. And they continued. Part 4. The Siren's Call. 200 years, 4 months, and 12 days after leaving Earth, the last hope entered the Alpha 22B system. Captain John Lee Park, the 7th captain of the line, stood on the bridge. Before him on the main viewer was a sight no human had ever seen with their own eyes: a new world. Alpha 22B was a swirling ball of blue and white, larger than Earth, hanging in the blackness. Its atmosphere was thick with clouds, but through the gaps they could see oceans, vast global oceans, broken only by the occasional chain of volcanic islands. It was beautiful. It was home. Or was it? As the Hope decelerated into orbit, firing its massive fusion thrusters in long, controlled burns, the science team went to work. They launched a swarm of probes into the atmosphere. The data that came back was a confusing mix of triumph and terror. The atmosphere was indeed nitrogen-oxygen, but with a higher concentration of carbon dioxide. Breathable, but with a metallic tang. The gravity was 2.1 Gs as predicted. Walking would feel like carrying a person on your back. The temperature at the poles was a freezing -50 degrees Celsius, but at the equator it was a balmy 25 degrees Celsius. Perfect. But the oceans were deep, impossibly deep. Radar sounded the depths to over 50 kilometers in places. The pressure at the bottom would crush any known submarine. And in those deeps, the sonar picked up something else. It wasn't movement exactly, it was a sound. A low, rhythmic, infrasonic pulse. "It's like a heartbeat," whispered the chief science officer. "A planetary heartbeat." The initial hope of a verdant, Earth-like paradise faded. Alpha 22B was a water world. There were no vast continents, no open plains for crops. There were only volcanoes, islands, and an endless, crushing ocean. A debate erupted in the ship. Some argued they should stay. They could build floating cities. They could adapt. They'd come too far to turn back. Others, looking at that dark, pulsing ocean, felt a primal fear. What was down there? Was it geological, or was it biological? Captain Park made a decision. "We're not landing yet. We observe, we listen. We've waited 200 years. We can wait a little longer." They stayed in orbit for 1 full year. They mapped every island, every thermal vent. They analyzed the heartbeat. It was geological, they concluded. The immense pressure and tidal forces from the planet's large moon caused the entire planetary crust to ring like a bell at regular intervals. It was a phenomenon never seen before, but explainable. The question remained, could they live there? The crew, now 15,000 strong after generations of births, looked to their captain. They had never known Earth. They only knew the ship. The idea of a horizon, of a sky that wasn't a video screen, of wind on their skin, was an almost religious longing. "We are the children of the Hope," Park said, addressing the entire ship. "We were sent to find a new Earth. We have not found it, but we have found a world. It will be hard. It will kill us if we are careless. But we are humans. We are the people who looked at the stars and decided to go. Now, we look at a world and decide to stay." Part V, the descent. The landing was not a single event. It was a process. They built shuttles, small aerodynamic craft designed to carry people and supplies down to the largest island chain, a volcanic archipelago they named New Archangel. The first landing party, led personally by Captain Park, descended through the thick clouds. The shuttle shook in the dense atmosphere. The gravity began to pull, heavy and insistent. It felt like a giant hand pressing down on their chests. They landed on a black sand beach, steam rising where the volcanic rock met the gentle waves. Park was the first to step out. She wore an exoskeleton suit to help her move against the gravity, as did everyone else. She took a step. It was exhausting. But then she looked up. The sky was a pale orange, scattered with unfamiliar constellations. The sun, K222, was a warm amber disk on the horizon. She took off her helmet. The air was thick, humid, and heavy with the smell of sulfur and salt. But it was air. It filled her lungs, cool and strange. She took a deep breath, and then another. She looked back at the shuttle, at the faces of her crew, her family, her civilization. She thought of Alara Vance I, and all those who had lived and died in the metal belly of the Hope. She thought of the black hole that had tried to tear them apart, and the void that had frozen them. She thought of all the people who had never seen a sunset, who had given their lives to the journey. She knelt down and touched the sand. It was warm. It was real. She stood up, her joints aching under the weight, and looked at her people. "Welcome home," she said. It was not the verdant paradise of ancient Earth. It was a world of volcanoes and deep dark oceans. It was a world of crushing gravity and strange geological heartbeats. But it was theirs. Behind them, orbiting silently in the blackness, the last hope waited. Its job was done. It had carried the seed of humanity across an ocean of stars. Now it was just a monument, a ghost ship, a reminder of the long, long journey. And on the black sand beach of New Archangel, the first child was born under the amber sun of Alpha 22b. She cried out, her tiny lungs filling with the heavy, sulphurous air. She was not an Earthling. She was not a Voyager. She was the first of a new people. She was the first Homo Siderea, the star human. Thank you for watching The Last Hope here on Kobu. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more sci-fi content. I look forward to seeing you on the next journey.